I recently came across this super sexy animation by Cub Studio, but aside from the animation, what really caught my eye was the texture in there. And that is what we're going to be working on today. And a big thank you to Motion Array for sponsoring this video, but more on them later on. And without talking too much, let's hop into After Effects, where I already have a composition set up 1920 by 1080, 24 frames per second, just the absolute standard that we always do. Now, before we can get to the meat of this tutorial, which is going to be the fun part, the sauce, which is all the textures and stylization, we need an animation to stylize. And what is more perfect than a little retro ping pong animation? So what we're going to do is just go up to our shape tool up here, and then you want to make sure that the fill is white, and then we just want to draw out a rectangle, which is going to be our little ping pong paddle on the side. And then I just want to make sure it's lined up in the middle. And I'm just doing that using the align tool, which you can find if you go into window and then go into align, then you can get that up there. And then I'm going to use whatever anchor point mover you want. You can use any of them. And I just want to make sure that the anchor point is definitely centered. So just to make it a little bit easier, then we can duplicate this. So we have 1 and 2, and I'm just going to rename this left and 1 right. And then I'm going to hit Option and apostrophe to bring up my grid. And I'm just going to take one of these, which is, this one is the right one, and I want to make sure that I take it to the right side. And then I just want to zoom in a little bit here, and I just want to make sure that it is pretty much centered up here. And that's just going to make it a little bit easier. It's going to be nice and symmetrical, so it's nice and pleasing to look at, but also just, you know, it's nice to work with something you kind of know where it is. Same thing with the left one over here, so maybe just move that just a tiny bit so that the center of this anchor point is right down the middle. Now we need to create a ball, and again, we're just going to use the shape tool. We're going to click and hold, and then we're going to go down to ellipse. And I just want to hold shift while I click and drag to create our ball. You can make it however big you want. We don't want it to be too crazy, just like what it would look like in one of the animations. Again, I want to make sure that the anchor point is centered, and then I want to center the ball right in the middle to give us our starting point. And we can rename this ping pong. So now we have 3 layers, just like our 2 rectangles, and I'm just going to hit P. And you can position these wherever you kind of want, but let's just take one and move it to the very top using the align tool. So I'm just going to select the top here. And the right one, I'm just going to move to the bottom. And then for both of them, if you click P, you open up the position keyframe here. You would just want to keyframe the position, go forward to about 2 seconds. And here you just want to make sure that the pacing is pretty similar so that it's not going to be too weird when we go to the next step. So just keep it very simple, something you can easily, like, you know the pacing of it. And then we're just going to take the right one over here, which is now at the bottom, and move that to the top. And the opposite goes for the one down here. Then if we alt click the expression tab right down here, we can type loop out, and it should give you a little suggestion thing. And then we want to do not apostrophes, but like the quotation marks. And then you just want to do ping pong, and that will basically take care of all the animation itself. So it'll just go up, so it'll go to this keyframe, and then it'll basically just do the opposite way. So essentially it's forever animated. You can take this, let's say we don't want it to actually touch the bottom of the screen. So let's just go to the very beginning and just hold shift and click the up arrow 3 times. And then we just want to do the opposite on the other end so that it kind of stops and ends in roughly the same position. As you can see here, it doesn't go quite to the end, and that is exactly what we want. So we just want to do 1, 2, 3 on the other side, and over here 1, 2, 3 on the first side. And then we can just right click where we wrote the expression, go to copy expression only, and then paste it onto the left. And now we have these ping pongs going in different directions. Now this is very symmetrical, so what you can do is, let's just take these keyframes for example. You can just move them a couple of frames back so that the animation isn't quite fully in sync. So there's a little bit of a slight offset, which just looks a little bit nicer and gives it a little bit more character, human nature, not so computery. That is pretty much it for the paddles themselves. So now we can animate the ping pong ball, and this is why we want the easing to be very linear and be predictable, because we're going to manually animate this ball. We are going to keyframe it at first in the center, because that is where the ball starts. And then let's go 2 seconds forward, and then we want to have it, let's say it's going to meet this paddle over here. And then we just want to make sure that it hits right here. So we don't want it to be like in the middle like this. We want the edge to hit the edge. And then now it's kind of up to us to imagine the trajectory from here. As you can see, I do have a little bit of curves here, and I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on a keyframe. I'm going to go to keyframe interpolation, and then in the 2 options you have here, you just want to make sure both of them are set to linear, and that's going to get rid of that, so you won't have any of those weird Bezier curves in there, and you might have to adjust this depending on your animation and stuff like that, but just make sure it is linear, because that is the look that we're going for. And then let's go forward to another 2 seconds here. Boom. We can just take this and bounce that up here. And let's put this at the very top here. And another 2 seconds. Sure that is lined up pretty good there. And we might have to adjust this a little bit so that it makes a little bit more sense here. Like such. Maybe move this up just a little bit here. Maybe down so that the angles kind of look like they would sort of make sense. So now we have an animation that looks like this. And you can see the easing here is a little bit different. You can see the dots are at different speeds. So you can grab your keyframe. So this is this part here, and we can drag this out to be closer in look to, or like the little increments you see on the screen here. So the distance between these dots, which kind of indicate the speed. So that'll be a similar pace here. And then you obviously want to adjust where this is going to go to, because now we've moved the keyframe forward, so it's going to look a little bit different. Again, this isn't super important because we are going to be doing some speed ramping, you can kind of call it, but it is a nice base to have something pretty similar in terms of pacing to work with. So it's just about keeping that in mind a little bit. So let's say we'll go over this way instead, right about here, and then we'll just move this up a little bit here to actually fit. Boom. And then lost bounce, which is not going to matter too much for the sake of this tutorial. We are just going to take that and move it down here. Boom. That looks pretty good. And again, you can play around with the pacing of this to make it somewhat similar. And that is pretty much it for the base animation. We can hit U to hide all those keyframes. I'm going to select all these 3 layers, and I'm going to hit Shift Command C to pre-comp this. And we're just going to name this Ping Pong Pre and hit OK, and then just drag this pre-comp into the pre-comp folder. And then we want to enable continuously rasterize. Now this is super important because essentially what this is going to let us do is make some punch-ins, so we can scale this up as much as we want without getting pixels. So if I turn that off, you can see very pixelated, very ugly, but we don't want that. So we want to make sure that continuously rasterize is on. Now this is where the fun comes in, and where you can create some really cool cinematic punch-ins. And we're going to right click, and then we're going to go to time and enable time remapping. So essentially what this is going to let us do, and also the reason why we kept all the keyframes linear, is play around with the pacing of it. So let's say at 1 second here, it hasn't quite reached the full board here. So we can just take this and just move it forward, boom, so that it just slows down, like speeds up right before the impact, like such. Maybe even just go to the impact itself, like that. So now we have something that's a little bit quicker, and we can play with the easing here, and then it's going to slow down as it comes off. And then maybe set a keyframe right here, and then go forward a little bit, and go to the bounce here, boom, and then go forward a little bit. So it's going to go really slow, keyframe that, and then go forward here, and make sure we get to the bounce here. So boom. So already we get something that looks a little bit more interesting, but then we can go in with the easing and create something that looks even cooler. So if I take all these keyframes and I just hit F9, they will ease all the keyframes, nice and simple for us. And then I'm going to open the graph editor so I can get a better sense of what my pacing actually looks like. So let's say we have this in the beginning where it kind of goes, and then it speeds up right until it hits. And maybe I want some of that pacing to be a little bit quicker to begin with, and then slow down right before the impact. So we get this like slow motion shot almost. And then coming out of it, I want it to be slow as well. So we get a nice, slow, gradual sense of movement, and picks up as it kind of hits. So maybe even right here is where I want it to be like at a peak speed. So just move that over here this way. And it's nice and simple to work with the graph editor in this case. And then let's actually, maybe we can even remove this keyframe here and just move this over this way. Oops. And then it slows down right as it comes to this impact. And again, I want this to be pretty quick coming out of the impact. So maybe move it over this way a little bit. And maybe even move this up a good bit more so that it's a little bit more continuous. And then here, boom, let's create some nice pacing coming out of this. maybe even move this keyframe over a little bit so it's not so long here. And this is really just a lot of tinkering until you get those nice impacts, kind of slow motion action shots. And the longer you take to actually finesse this, the better it's gonna look. This impact is super sick. So if we look at this graph right here, has a bunch of speed coming into this and then just completely drops off. Could even move this over just a little bit, just to get a little bit more slowness right before the impact so we really get a sense of it. Like such, and then a nice slow gradual leave here. And just like that, we have a super sexy little ping pong animation, and this is where the fun actually begins, which is the sauce. In our case, it's probably the most important bit because it's what's really gonna bring this to life, and that's where today's video sponsor Motion Array comes into play. Motion Array is an all-in-one creative platform with pretty much anything you could possibly need for your creative projects. Whether you're on the lookout for plugins, video templates, presets, motion graphics, regular graphics, stock footage, photos, music, sound effects, an AI voiceover feature, and now even LUTs. I use LUTs all the time. Even in the footage you're seeing right now, I'm using a LUT. It's just such an easy way to elevate the videos you're working on, but also helps setting the mood. Motion Array makes finding a LUT that will work for whatever project you're working on super easy. All you have to worry about is the vibe. Then you just go into the little search engine, type out what you're looking for, and it'll give you a bunch of suggestions. All of the LUTs work in After Effects, they work in Premiere Pro, Final Cut, pretty much any editing software that you're using, you're going to be able to use them as long as they have like a LUT feature. In our case, we're going to be using it in After Effects using the Lumetri color effect, but we'll get into that in a little bit. Something important to note is that all of these LUTs are not conversion LUTs, which means that you need to be working with Rec 709 footage. For us, it's not going to be a problem because our animation is already in Rec 709, so we don't really have to worry about anything other than making our stuff look good. I'm just going to show real quick how we're going to apply this LUT and then show you how it kind of looks on this. All I'm going to do in our composition is hold Shift-Command-Y to create an adjustment layer. I'm going to add a Lumetri color here. And then you actually have two places where you can add LUTs. So you have the basic correction, which is typically where you'd want to convert your footage from log footage to Rec 709. So we're not going to touch that, but you can combine different LUTs. Or you can do it in the creative tab. If you go into the look, you can just click that and then you can hit custom or browse. And you can see I have a bunch installed. If I go to browse, it's going to open up a little folder here where I have a bunch of different assets we can use. So in this instance, I think I'm going to use this channel X3 cube. All the LUTs that we'll be using in this and the assets as well will be linked down below. The LUTs and a lot of the textures are from Motion Array. So you can go down into the description, get that. You can use my link in the description as well for Motion Array to get $50 off when you sign up for the annual subscription. But I'm gonna hit open, and just like that, we have a LUT applied. Now it's gonna be a bit hard to tell because this is just black and white, but if let's say I create a solid and just put whatever color I kind of want just to show you a little bit, put it below the adjustment layer, and then you can see the difference that a LUT makes. So it just changes the colors a little bit, but it's gonna look really sick once we start adding all our glows and different details. But just wanted to show you real quick how to use that in there. With that being said, I just wanna say a quick thank you to Motion Array for sponsoring this video and for giving me the opportunity to use all these sick assets and the LUTs that we're using today, and you can have access to that as well. But let's just hop on with the tutorial and start creating something that looks super, super sexy. First step here in creating the look that we're going for is actually creating a background. So I'm just gonna create a solid. I'm just gonna make it black. It doesn't really matter. And I'm just gonna change the name of it to BG because that's what it is. And then I am gonna add a gradient ramp to this. And I'm just gonna drag this to the very bottom. I'm gonna change it to a linear or radial ramp, sorry. Put that right in the center, swap the colors, and just change this, give it a slight blue tint, just to give it a little bit of like a mood. And then I'm gonna increase this right here so that we have a little bit of that blue there. And again, if I turn on the LUT, you can see just changes it a little bit. It's a little bit more subtle, changes the hue, the saturation, luminance, and all that stuff of it. I love working with this and creating a look. I think it's super underrated using LUTs in your animations to get the right look that you're going for. Then we are gonna create another adjustment layer, and I'm just gonna add a vignette to this and put this, we'll just leave this right below the LUT here. So I'm just gonna name this LUT for now. And actually, let me just drag this below the ping pong as well, because I just want to emphasize the background a little bit. And I'm just gonna rename this vignette. Then we want to play around with our cuts here. So if I hit U, I'll open up the keyframes and I'll just make a couple of cuts here. So right before it kind of comes in here, I'm just gonna cut this up, and then right after it leaves here, like that. And then right before it maybe impacts there, I'll cut right there. And as it leaves, maybe cut it right there, maybe cut there. So now we can play around with zooming in a little bit. So I know I'm just gonna work backwards. So this will be the end. We can leave that full scale. This one, I know I want it to be zoomed in a lot on the impact itself. I'm just gonna scale that up and move that in. Keep it kind of in the left side to keep that sense of scale and position. And then we get that nice we could even cut, let's say, cut that right there and move these up a little bit. Maybe leave a couple more frames here just to get, so it's not too crazy in terms of the transition itself. So maybe take this one, scale it up, and just move this down a little bit. And we obviously want to make sure that it's actually in frame so that we get that nice little bit of contact right there. Maybe scale this up even more actually. So now we have something that looks kind of like this. I think I like this being out wide. So just this cut right here, I'm gonna scale and zoom in here. So now we get, boom. And the sequence looks a little like this. Maybe cut that right there. And then just drag these in. And this is all just playing with the pacing of it, making sure that we have an animation that, you know, actually flows even with the cuts. Can we maybe get away with deleting that section and just moving that up there? Oh yeah, that's good. Boom, so now we have the pacing pretty much down, and now we can add a little bit of like some blur cuts, which I always think looks super sick. So I'm just gonna hit U to hide everything here, because I don't want to show all that. I'm gonna hit Shift-Command-Y again, and then I'm gonna add a false box blur, put it below the LUT, and then I'm just gonna set that to 6 in the blur radius. And then to begin with, we can have a little bit of like a blur out. So I come in here and just set that to 0. I'm actually just gonna set the iterations to 6 as well to get something that looks a little bit nicer. So I get something that zooms out just a little bit here. And then as we cut to this scene right here, I want it to fade again. Keyframe that at 0, go to the cut right here, set that to 6, and then go forward a little bit and set that to 0. So it's a little bit more of a gradual exit this time. And then maybe here we can do a quick one. Boom, and maybe just trim this up just a little bit. Boom, that's nice. Now we can ease this a little bit. I wanna, in particular, take these two, hit F9, and then I just wanna take these and move them up. Boom, and boom. So that's like super quick coming in. Let's just take all these actually and just F9 these. So maybe have that a little bit more pushed in this way. And leave a little bit quicker. Oops. Going in, and then maybe pick up the pace as it goes out here. Like such. And that is pretty much it for the little blur look here. Next step is above the false box blur that we just did with all the little animations, we are gonna add another effect. We're gonna add a mosaic effect. And let's just make sure we actually rename all of these layers because it is gonna get a little bit hectic. And the mosaic effect, we wanna just up this a good bit until we get something that's kind of pixelated. Again, we are going for that look. I don't wanna turn on sharp colors because I do want a little bit of just that blurry kind of anti-aliasing type of look. And then above that, we are gonna add an optics compensation, which is, again, just to give us a little bit of that look like a bulging screen. Just increase that, and you can turn off the transparent mode to see how it's kind of being affected. I'm gonna increase that a good bit, and then rename this optics comp, Shift-Command-Y once again. I know there's a lot of adjustment layers here, bear with me. We are gonna add a transform effect to this, and then just scale this up a little bit so that the edges are covered, maybe even not so hectic on the optics comp maybe. Just a little bit of like a bulge, and decrease the scale of that just a little bit here. So we just get a little bit of that sense of just a tiny bit of curvature. So now it looks just a little bit more screeny, I guess you can kind of call it. And you can see the mosaic is pretty intense when it gets smaller. So you can always up this a little bit, just play around with something that in general looks pretty good all across the board. We are gonna be going and adding that to the animation itself, but it's just to give it a little bit extra. Then we are gonna add another transform effect, which is this time it's gonna be like a shake. So we are gonna go into the scale and just set that to like 101 or 102, and then we're gonna alt click the position, and then down in the little expression box that opens up, we are gonna add a posterized time, and then we're just gonna set this on like 6 for the expression itself, and then go down into the second line and add a wiggle, and we'll just do 222, 2 for a little bit of camera shake here, which is just the tiniest bit of like movement. You can kind of see it a little bit. Nothing too intense, but just to give it a little bit of, again, character. And then we are gonna add our last adjustment layer for now, and that is gonna be a posterized time. You can set this to something like 8. I'm not too worried about it being exactly on the dot, like 6, 12, 24, you know, in that sense. Sometimes you can take some creative liberty. I think 8 looks pretty good for this type of look because we don't want it to be too smooth, but we also don't want to be too slow. You can always increase this as well to get a little bit of a different look, like go crazy and say something like 15 to slow it down just a little bit, but not as much as 12 would. Now let's go in and play with this ping pong itself a little bit. So in here, to the ping pong ball itself, I'm gonna add an echo effect, and that is just to create a little bit of a trail on this ball. So in here, I'm just gonna set that to 0.003, like negative 0.003, increase the number of echoes to something like maybe 50, and then I'm gonna set the decay to 0.95, 0.9, which is just gonna give us a little bit of like a feathered tail instead of it just being a solid. I think 0.9 will look pretty good for this. And I just want this on the ball to give it just a little bit of movement, like it's moving fast. Now, once we've added the echo, we're gonna go back in here and we are gonna create a little effect stack to add on top of this. Again, we're gonna add a mosaic here, and you might wanna go in and play around with the values because it will change depending on how zoomed in you are. So you're gonna have to adjust this a little bit per like animation itself, but we just want something just to aid it just a little bit in creating the look that we want. We are gonna add a little bit of a shake. So again, I'm just gonna let's just go into our shake and copy that and just paste that onto our effect stack and the layer itself. I'm gonna place that before the mosaic and just set the scale back to 100. So we aren't messing with that because we don't need to. In this case, there's no edges that we want to cover. We are gonna add a colorama to this. And this is where you'll see why I want those feathered edges. So if I go into get intensity from in the input phase, I want to change this to alpha. So now you can see in the very middle, it's red. And then as it kind of fades out, it changes colors. In the output cycle, I want something that's a little bit more similar. So I'm just gonna, or like a little bit simpler, I guess I should say. So let's just remove most of these. I'll set the main color to white, which is gonna be our brightest. And then I want to take the bottom here and just change it to something like, we can go maybe like a orangey kind of look maybe. So an orange and pinkish, purplish something. We can play around with this and get really the look that we want here. So something like that probably works pretty good. Now we can go into this white spot right here in the middle, and we're just gonna drag the opacity of that all the way down. And then we're gonna get a nice faded look here, which is just, I think it looks pretty good. And it's just gonna give us a little bit of that character. And then last but not least, we are gonna add a deep glow to this, which it is a paid plugin. You can use other methods of using glow, but this is just the easiest. I'm gonna increase the radius a little bit and set down the exposure just a little bit so that it's not too crazy. Again, you can go in and if you really wanted to, you can move the mosaic all the way at the bottom here so it kind of affects the glow as well and play around with that a little bit. You can even decrease this a little bit to be a bit more centralized if you want that. So you just have to play around with kind of the look that you want to go for in terms of this. And then you just want to take all of these effects that we've just added here. So select all those, copy it, and paste it to all the other cutouts that we have of this animation. Now I do think that maybe we could get a little bit more color in each of these. So what I could do is go into our, let's just take this for example, add a fast blur to this, fast box blur, put that below my colorama here, and just increase it just a little bit, something like 2, which is gonna give us a little bit more color here, and up this a little bit, and up this a little bit. Maybe add a little bit more color in here, maybe like a boom. And then for the deep glow, maybe just decrease this a little bit more. Maybe let's say like 300 and something like 0.2 maybe for the glow. So it's not too overbearing, overpowering. And then in the mosaic in here, we can go in, can turn on sharp colors, which is gonna give us a little bit more texture in this one, in the overall. So that'll help a little bit as well. And then we of course just wanna make sure that we copy all of this into all of those other effects. So just select all of this, delete all that we have, and paste that onto there. So we can enable the LUT now, and we can see the colors that it's gonna give us, and we can play around with all of these settings as well, but it's just a super nice baseline. I like some of the turquoise that it kind of adds into that. The good thing about using it in the creative field is we can actually adjust intensity, so it doesn't need to be as overpowering. You can set it all the way down to 0, 100, or somewhere right in between, just to get a little bit of that tint in there, which I really do like. You can play around with all the other settings in Telemetry. But now we get to the textures. So we're gonna go back into my little folder in here, and I do have some textures that we are gonna be playing with. I'll start with the motion array ones, which again, link in the description if you do want to get those. Well, you're going to start with some fingerprints. This is just a super nice little fingerprint one. You can also make this yourself if you really wanted to, but it's just a lot easier using this. And let's scale this down and play around with the blending mode by holding shift and then clicking plus or minus. Add maybe screen works pretty well. Then we can add a levels to this and we can play around with the texture, not the texture, but the intensity of all this. Maybe decrease that a little bit here, a little bit more texture smudge, and then decrease the opacity of it just a little bit. So we really see it in some of the bright areas. And then we can go ahead, let's add some more, maybe a nice scratch texture here, one of these ones. I think this one looks pretty cool. So we'll go ahead, add that, scale this down a little bit like that. And again, we just want to play around with the blend modes. Probably something like add or screen will work pretty good for this. Something like that. And just decrease the opacity for this one as well, just to give it a little bit more texture. We want to add just a little bit of levels in there. Just punch it just a little bit in terms of the texture we're going to be getting out of this. Then let's take this screen texture here. I think this one is pretty interesting. We could find some use for this. I'm just going to add a hue and saturation to this and just take all the saturation out of it. And then I'm just going to hit S to bring up the scale and scale this down to fit my comp here. And again, cycle through all the blend modes that we do have available to us. I think vivid light is pretty cool, but we just want to decrease that a lot just to get a little bit of those lines in there, make it look nice and sexy. I think for the background, we're just going to decrease the saturation of it just a little bit so it's not as blue, just a slight blue tint to it. I think that looks pretty good, especially with these close-ups. And we can always take these and move them below our adjustment layer and the shake and stuff like that, so we get a little bit of texture in there as well. Play around with that just a little bit in terms of the look and the order that you do want to stack everything in. I do have this texture I did scan myself, which is just a little bit, some extra smudges, I guess you can kind of call it, super high res. And I just want to rotate this around and scale this down just a little bit, just for some finer detail in here. And again, set that to something like screen, just to get some nice details. Add a levels once again, and I just want to increase the black levels of this to really get rid of that. And then if I remove my other fingerprints, you can see just the ones that I have in here. Show that back up and maybe just decrease the opacity of it just a little bit more. And just like that, we have a nice little retro smudge type of look, animation, whatever you want to call it. I think it's super fun to play around with all these textures and just creating something that's a little bit different. But with that being said, I just want to say thank you for watching. I hope you learned something new, and thank you to Motion Array as well for sponsoring this video. There's some really cool stuff. I highly recommend checking them out. And don't forget, you can use my link in the description to get $50 off when you sign up for the annual subscription. And if you are interested in this project file that we've been working on today, you can head to patreon.com/Mapal to get access to all the files there, as well as the files from the previous tutorials. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know, and I'll see you again very, very soon. Peace out.